MSU's Office of K-12 Outreach, bringing innovation and best practices to educators across Michigan, the U.S., and the world.
Okay, so we're going to move into phase 2, which is the explore and discover phase of the conversation, where we're really going to look at data, the real live data, so you can see how close your predictions are. But then there's layers and layers of this data to look at, which I think will be really interesting and will add, I hope, a different perspective to the conversation that we're going to have. If you remember, we're going to look at the reading, math, and writing scores. So we're going to look at just 2013. We're going to look at the demographic of the testers. We're going to look at the bottom 30% demographically. Then once we've kind of exhausted that and you feel like you've really looked at it in every angle that we need to, then we'll go on and look at with the 30% with names. But I think once we start talking about names, then it's easy to derail into the name conversation and not seeing what the big picture is first. So I really want to make sure that we exhaust the big picture, that we're really comfortable, that we've dug through and found anything that we think is important to take with us before we hit to the names. I think that's a really interesting level, but I want to make sure we do the other piece first. Okay? As you remember, because you facilitate this all the time, in this phase we're really looking for the big ideas, the big trends, those things that either alarm us, you know the drill. And what's the one question that we don't talk about during this phase? Jenny? What's the one? Why? Yeah, we don't. Yeah, we're not gonna. These we're gonna leave. Those may be the whys. I mean, we'll figure that out later. And that's, of course, what the work that we'll do this afternoon is to take us through all those causal theories and say, oh, how do they apply, or how don't they apply? But as you know, because you lead this all the time, and I've watched you, this is the important part here is to really pull that data apart and see what's there to tell us the story. So our goal will be that you'll chart at least 5. There might be more. So as you see, there might be more important narrative statements there than just 5. So you're not wed to 5, but again, to remind you of the level of specificity that we want. We want to be very exact so that we don't have to carry the data around with us. After that, we can just look at it on the wall when we get to the afternoon work. Okay, pretty clear on where you, obviously, because you do this all the time, where we're going. I want to show you what you're going to see, then I'm going to give you a hard copy of it, and then you can actually look, okay? So you're going to see, this would be reading by level, by grade level. So you'll see all of that. So what you may have in front of you is aggregated for all of them. I pulled them out so that you could look at 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th separately. So that was interesting. You'll see that in reading. You'll see that in math. So again, you guys will do just the reading, you'll do just the math. We'll do the writing one together because it's only one grade level and won't be that hard to do. You were like spot on there, weren't you? Almost. Then we've got the demographics of the testers from 2013, the number of students by grade level, whether the male or the gender breakdown, whether they were economically disadvantaged or not, the number and the percentage, whether they were special education students or not, students with disabilities, and the percentage, and then if they were both economically disadvantaged and were a student with a disability, then those numbers are noted there for you as well. And I think that'll be really interesting when you look at the demographic data that you're going to see in front of you in just a minute, that you can see, given that 35% of our students are economically disadvantaged, what percentage would we expect to see in the bottom 30% versus, how many are actually there. So I thought that was very important data to give you, and you'll be able to look at that. And then finally, you'll have the demographic data. And I included all 5 content areas because I know that, Lynn would have been here, but she has family issues. So you'd want to see some of that as well. So you'll see the number of testers, etc. And you'll be able to look at that. So you'll be looking at all of those pieces of data. For the most part, it'll be 3 pages, the summary by grade level, the demographic data, and then the bottom 30%. And again, once we've exhausted that, then we can look at names and look for commonalities. Questions at all about what we're doing? So our task, again, is to explore this data, rip it apart as much as we can, identify at least 5, if not more, of the narrative statements that are really important in the data. And then we'll do math, or we'll do writing together. All right? All right. So as Michelle wraps up recording the data here, we're going to look at what happened in reading and math. We're going to make sure that Grant understands everything that's put up there and that we identify that which we think altogether is significant. Then we'll take a quick look at writing, because that's one column. We'll look at that and we'll compare that to the demographics, to see, is whatever's happening in reading and math, is it the same thing that's happening in writing, or is that somehow an anomaly in and of itself? We'll look at that. Then it'll probably be lunchtime for us at that point. When we come back, we'll spend a few minutes with names. So we have that data for you. You can look at that. And then we'll jump into causals after that and kind of wrap it up. So let's look at the math one first, which is right to the left. 50% of students are proficient in math, grades 3 through 5. Is that good or bad? Okay, Jenny says it's not good enough. All right. All right, so this is not good enough.
Could be worse.
Yeah, well, and where have you been? That's the other question. We don't have prior, so at 50% may be great if you were at 25%. There's no comparative piece of that, but is it where we all want to be? No.
Right. So Jenny is not happy with, we'll take 50%, but we certainly want more than that, right? I think that's the point of that statement, right? Okay. There are more students at the red level, 34% in 6th grade, in comparison to grades 3, 4, and 5, where the percentage in level 4 was between 14 and 24%. So we don't know if historically, we need to look at other data. We don't know if historically that number is consistent with where they've been throughout, but we know that that was a concern, okay? Because they're getting ready to go to middle school. Okay, and when they're going to middle school, 34% of them, of that, at least that cohort, was at level 4. Okay? 6% of the population as a whole, for all of your testers, were economically disadvantaged and were students with disabilities. So that was 20 students, right, that were tested. Yeah. Okay, and then the next one says, of those 20, 16 of them were in the bottom 30% in math. So if you were economically disadvantaged and you had a disability, then and there were 20 of you total in the building who tested, 80% of you were going to show up on the bottom 30%. Right? And whatever's happening there. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, one of the other things we'd also want to know this is why the causal or the confirmation in stage 3 is so important, that before we jump onto that and think that, and replicate that, we're going to want to see if that's consistent. You'd want to see if that were consistent in other grades, right? Before you said, oh, whatever that is, it's working, Absolutely. And then our last statement was 23 out of 34 students with disabilities, or about 2/3, were in the bottom 30% in math. So that was not combining students with disabilities and economic status. But if we look just at students with disabilities, 2/3 of them are in the bottom 30%. Right. Yep. Who did well of that 1/3? And yep, absolutely. Which disabilities are they? And where we're consistently finding them in the bottom 30%. Was there anything in there that was surprising? Jenny, you've probably spent the most time looking at math data because you're the chair of the math committee. Is there anything in there that was surprising to you? Yeah. Yeah, so when I give you the right data, right? Okay, so we're seeing some major growth when we look at that, okay, which is outstanding. Absolutely. Okay. You guys didn't look at the math, so is there questions that you want to ask about the math data when you look at these were what they think are the most important issues? Sure. It's the same. Yeah, and again, now when we can take that to the next level, are these 16 the same children? You know, is there any little bit of fluctuation, but are these the same 16 children who aren't successful in reading and then aren't successful in math? And depending on grade level, how many of them who happen to be fourth graders, you know, didn't do well on the writing test as well, you know, in which case? Correct. Absolutely. Okay. Michelle or someone else from your team, Michelle did all the writing. Does someone else want to take us through the reading, the big ideas in reading?
We said that in 2013 on the MEP assessment in reading, 91 students were in the bottom 30%. And then we broke it down to 54 males and 37 females.
So are you saying we have a gender issue or not really?
It's not huge.
It's not huge, right? It's not huge. Nope, it's not huge. Okay.
In 2013 on the MEP assessment in reading, in grades 3 through 6, at least 76% of the students scored at a level 1 or 2. So we were actually pleased with that.
Yeah, across the grade level. Yeah, right. Okay, so at least 76%, you know, were proficient on the test, in some grades higher, right? Mm-hmm. That was the lowest common denominator there. Are you happy with 76%?
I think it's great. I mean, obviously, we have room to grow.
Sure.
We want better, but 76 is...
76 was the lowest, so we went all the way up to, I think, 81 or 82.
76 to 81, so that's great. And again, based on those predictions that we had at the beginning, not surprising, right, that you would see some of this reflected in the reading data, because Jenny's going, yep, right. Is it right? Not surprising? Okay. Not surprising. Okay. Keep going, Jamie. You're doing a great job.
43 students of the 118 economically disadvantaged students were in the bottom 30%.
Okay, so let's flesh this one out so I understand. 43 of 118 were in the bottom 30%. What percentage is that?
Well, what is it, 43 over?
43 divided by 118. What percentage is that?
Just a little less than 30%. Right, yeah.
Just a little less than 30%. And how many students that tested were students who lived in poverty?
118, did you say?
Yeah, what's that percentage? 35. So 35% of our students who tested live in poverty, and we have slightly less than 30%. Is that what I'm hearing you say? 36%? So that's almost spot on, right? The percentage of kids who live in poverty overall, and the percentage of students who live in poverty who show up in the bottom 30%. That shouldn't surprise you. I think that's great. Don't you think?
It just tells us we're not managing poverty issues, because everyone's score isn't.
Exactly. Right. If we would have a much higher percentage of students in poverty, then we would say, wow, we've got some issues, you know, around the instruction and reading for kids who live in poverty, because the number reflects the greater population. Not that we want to have anybody in the bottom 30% who's not proficient, but that number seems consistent with the overall demographic. Does that make sense, or have I just confused everybody?
No, I mean, I think it raises a huge red flag.
Why?
Because we often work with these kids and we're not making a difference. I mean, we're doing something wrong, or we're not meeting their needs because because, now I'm confusing myself.
Right. So this was 36%,
Right.
okay? But
You're just saying it's too high, Jane?
It's, yeah. I mean, I think that with the amount of intervention.
right, they don't have a learning
Right,
disability,
so
right? Okay, so you'd like to see that number dramatically reduced because we're doing so many interventions for
Correct.
children who live in poverty.
Correct.
Right. Okay. The question that you also have to ask yourself, though, is, and you'll see that in the levels when you see names, is of those 36% who are in poverty, are any of those students proficient? Because remember, we're still looking at the bottom 30%, and if your bottom 30% is still way up here, or see what I'm saying? So we need to kind of look at that to see where they are. If 81% of our students are passing the test in a grade level, are these kids yellow? And they're almost, or are they red? Or are some of the bottom 30% even green? Right? Because they could be, and that changes the level of severity of the issue and the level of severity of the intervention. Right? But if this number were 80%, how would that change the conversation? How would it change it? You're nodding, but I want to make sure we all understand the point I'm trying to make. Jenny, help me with that point, will you please?
The cause, when we get into the causes, we definitely have to have some tough discussions, I think.
Because then we would have a disproportionate number of children in poverty in the bottom 30%. Because of the whole population of testers, only 35% are in poverty. Okay, so someone's got to be in the bottom 30% demographically, right? Okay, so, but if that number were, but if 80% of them were in poverty, then, that would be an issue. We have, it's just like this number over here. If you have a student with disability, 80% of all the kids with disabilities, okay, and are in poverty, end up in the bottom 30%. So it's a slightly different demographic in reading than it is in math. And again, we can probably point to all these other posters as some of the explanation for that. Sure. Okay. Carry away, Jamie.
18 students of the 34 students with disabilities were in the bottom 30%.
So over half, right? Over half of all students with a disability were in the bottom 30% in reading. Okay.
Third grade students had the most students that were economically disadvantaged, yet third grade was not the lowest performing grade.
Okay, explain that one so I understand what that means.
Ooh, this was a hard one to explain.
Okay.
That we looked at, I think Richard looked at this. We looked at the demographics.
Okay.
And in third grade, we had 38.7% of the students that were economically disadvantaged
Okay.
did not, or no, it was just a statement that 38.7% of the students in third grade were economically.
Okay. Okay.
And then it decreased each year. Fourth grade went to 35.6, 33.8,
Okay.
33.3. Yet there wasn't a consistent trend in the scores.
Okay. So what are you saying there?
But economic disadvantage doesn't, according to our data, have anything to do with their...
You see no correlation between, okay, and explain that again so all these math people over here can follow you?
No, overall. So third grade had the highest percentage of students who are economically disadvantaged.
38.7%, okay.
But third grade did not have the highest percent of students who were proficient. There was no correlation there. So every year, from third through sixth grade, the number of students who are economically disadvantaged went down.
Okay.
And it doesn't correlate with their proficiency on the meet.
Did proficiency go up or down?
It bounced.
It bounced. Overall proficiency.
Level 1 and 2.
Okay.
So you'd think that if the economically disadvantaged is at 30, that grade level's percentage is say 70,
Exactly.
the next grade level is 40, that percentage proficient should go down.
Right.
Right, that's what they're saying, but.
And you're not seeing that. Okay. All right. Anything else? Anybody have any questions? The math folks, do you have questions that you want to ask the reading folks? I'm going to flash you on the screen. You're going to still need your demographic data, okay? So hang on to the demographics of the test, of the testers, and the demographics of the bottom 30%. I'm going to show you the accurate writing scores. There they are. Those have been amended because, again, I was very consistent yesterday. I put all district data in instead of your own, so that's interesting. So there we see the percentages that are blue, green, yellow, and red. You like the red number because it's really small, right? Absolutely. Look at the bottom 30% in terms of the demographic. What do we see in writing? Do we see anything different? 22 students are in the bottom 30% because we only have 71 tested. What do you see that's different here?
Your mail.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a much larger percentage of males in the bottom 30%. It's almost a 2-to-1 ratio, is it not? Now, we saw that a year ago when we looked at Sunset Lake's writing data for the very first time. We saw this gender gap in writing, which interestingly we don't see at the high school. By high school, it disappears.
I don't think it's consistent at buildings either. One other building had the same thing, but another building didn't.
Right. So it's this, we're not sure what the heck, I mean, I don't know what the reason is for that. I mean, but we know that, interestingly, it shows up again here when you look at the data a different way in the bottom 30% graphic. Anything else that you notice when you look at those numbers and you compare to bottom 30% demographic that would be similar or different than what we see in reading and math? Pat?
The special ed numbers are lower. More of them are passing. There's only 4 that didn't pass, 4 out of 22. Oh wait,
4 out of 22 in the
4
bottom
out of
30.
There's only 4 out of 22. What's the percentage of 4 out of 22?
20%.
So about 20% of students with disabilities in the bottom 30. That's a lot different, isn't it, than in some of the other content areas. All right, what else do we see that's interesting or noteworthy? Go ahead, Jenny. What do you?
9 out of 22 in the bottom 30 were academically disadvantaged, about 50%.
9 out of 22, so about 50% were economically disadvantaged. So a little bit greater proportion of students who are in poverty compared to the overall population in the bottom 30%. Anything else that you see is significant?
If you
Jamie, go ahead.
across the board, the students with disabilities scored wait. I was going to say the students economically disadvantaged across the board did not perform as well as the students with disabilities across the board, but I don't think that that's...
Is that just because the number of
Is that-
students with disabilities is not as many as...
Right. So that doesn't work.
Okay. Because in grade 4, 4 of 7, right, show up in the bottom 30%. Is that right?
I don't know, 4 of 7. Yeah.
4 of 7. How many students with disabilities in grade 4 tested? We're going to challenge Jenny's numbers in narrative statement number 2 for a moment. Let's look at that. How many special education students were there in grade 4? 7. Okay, because not all kids test in writing, so only grade 4 tests in writing, so now our denominator is 7. How many of those 7 showed up in the bottom 30%? 4. So 4, what percentage is 4 sevenths?
More than half.
It's more than half. So what percentage? What is it?
57.
57%. So that changes that number a little bit because we can't count all 20 because only 7 of them were 4th graders. Okay? So let's double check on number 3 for a moment. How many economically disadvantaged students were there in grade 4? Is 22 correct? 31. And how many of them show up in the bottom 30%? 9. Okay, so it's a slightly less percentage than before. Okay, that's about 33%, isn't it? 32?
29.
29? Perfect. Yeah, that is kind of interesting, isn't it? Now, this is the tricky one because you got to remember that only 4th graders take the test, so you got to only pull the 4th grade demographic when you do that, or you'll skew your numbers out a little bit. Do we have a gender gap in reading?
Not significant.
Not significant. Do we have a gender gap in math?
A little.
No gap in math.
Not really, right? Not statistically significant. But we do have one in writing, 2 to 1. What about social studies? Does it show up in social studies?
Small.
Small?
None in science.
And none in science.
Math and science are issues.
So for gender, writing seems to be the issue. And of course, we found that a year ago, Laura's, she knows, having worked in that discipline as the chair of that committee, that it's there, right? Okay. Because you've looked at this data so many times, does this lens give you a different point of view? Does this give you new information that you didn't have when you looked at it through different lenses last year? What are those, Laura?
We didn't have the specific data about the bottom 30%.
Right. Okay.
So,
How does that change your perspective?
well, we made lots of assumptions about that,
Mm-hmm.
like being economically disadvantaged, probably. But that proved to be false now that we see this.
Okay.
So, yeah, we can't make any assumptions about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to know so that we can figure out how to close that gap.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And again, the way that the state calculates the achievement gap, they don't identify subgroups, they simply identify weaker performance. So these happen to be the kids by demographic who show up in when you pull the weakest performances of children. Any other unique, Jenny, do you see anything differently through this lens than in, does this reinforce or does it change any perspective?
I mean, just the same as what Laura said, just being able to look at the bottom 30 and the demographics
Mm-hmm.
raises some more questions.
Some more, such as?
As I didn't want to get into the why, but as we said before, I like to look at, who was successful here, and we need to figure out what we did for those particular
Right.
kiddos. And
Right. Which we have right here, and which we'll do as soon as we get back from lunch. We'll spend a little bit of time here, then we'll go into phase 3. We'll pull some of these most significant issues. We'll talk about them in phase 3 and see again. We're trying to see if this is everything, or if we missed something with given us a new lens. Do we change? Do we add to anything that we talked about from last spring?